Hi, this is Mike with TFB TV. Now, continuing the general theme of Euro pistols, this here is not a modern pistol. It might look like a modern pistol, but it very much isn't, and I'll get on to why in just a moment. Now, if you're thinking it looks like a Colt 1903, well, that's because it's a Colt 1903 pocket hammerless on steroids. Now, the reason for this is that FN in Belgium had had a lot of success with their Model 1900, John Browning design. Really successful. I mean, it's a 32 ACP, but the Europeans thought, well, that's all right, and it became pretty much a almost universal caliber, the nearest thing to a universal caliber in the way we think of 9mm Parabellum to be at the moment. Now, at around the same time, there were a couple of full power pistols that started to become popular, particularly the early models of the Luger in 765 Para, and that started to raise questions about 32 ACP as a military handgun cartridge. Now, FN typically got the rights for Browning's pistol designs for Europe, whereas Colt had them for the US, and these were two slightly different markets. There weren't necessarily the same models produced in both. Now, at this time, Colt were busy developing a series of Browning pistols together with John Browning himself. Lock breech, 38 ACP typically, and it was the series that would ultimately end up with the 1911. Now, broadly configuration-wise, this looks a bit like a 1911, but when we take it apart, you'll see that it's really not actually that similar at all on the inside. Now, because of the Luger in 765 Para, various other designs coming out in what we'd now consider to be pretty much full power cartridges, they decided they needed something to go a bit beyond the 32 ACP capabilities. Now, John Browning wasn't particularly interested in developing something totally new, so they took the Colt 1903 pocket hammerless and injected it with steroids and came up with this. Now, cartridge-wise, now, you must remember that in this period, and we're talking 1903 for this being put into production, 9mm Para didn't exist yet. Practically everybody was playing with a proprietary cartridge. So what we've got here is basically scaled up 32 ACP. It's 9mm Browning long, which is 9x20 semi-rimmed. So just like 32 ACP, the rim is slightly broader than the case. And yeah, so what this actually ends up being is the FN 1903. It's straight blowback, and it's basically the most powerful, I believe I'm correct in saying that this is the most powerful blowback handgun ever to see wide adoption. Now, these days we've got the dreaded high points, which are straight blowbacks in 9mm 40 Smith & Wesson and 45 ACP, and they get around the typical problem with blowbacks by using modern dense alloys for the slide, so they've got a lot more weight in the slide. Now, the problem with a straight blowback is that there's nothing holding the breech closed except the mainspring and the weight of the slide. So that's all there is holding it back. Now, this limits you to the power of the cartridge that you can put in this, unless you're going to go in for some funky system for disconnecting the mainspring or taking some of the tension off it while you cock it. And there are all sorts of unsuccessful Euro designs where you could disengage. None of them basically were successful. There was even a Walther attempt pre-World War II at a 9 Para service pistol, and they just put a massive great spring in it to the point where it was very difficult to operate. So as I said, this is not a particularly modern pistol. Now, it looks modern. It's got a slide, it's modern configuration, trigger, grip, magazine in the grip, as you'd expect, but the ergonomics are all over the place. I'll show you the results of that in a minute. Now, when we go back to this period, you must remember that we don't know what a pistol is supposed to be like. We know now what a pistol is supposed to be like, and every pistol that comes out pretty much has this basic configuration. The grip size, we all know how the ergonomics of grips work. SIG-Sauer P226, this is a modern pistol. Now, if I hold the two together, you'll see that there's quite a lot of difference there with the length of the grip. This has got a longer slide than the 226, and it's got a much shorter, skinnier grip. And the problem with that is that it makes it really hard to shoot straight. What also doesn't help is that this has the old style, the pre-1911 style of, you might call it an active grip safety, that you have to really, really squeeze quite hard to get it to go. Now, first thing I did with this was get some ammunition and take it to the range. Now, this type of grip safety in the smaller Colt 1903 grip is not too bad. It's really not too bad. It's not great, but it's not too bad. And my 1910 that I showed in an earlier video here, it's not too bad. The problem here is that this grip is just wrong. It's just in the middle, really in the middle. It sort of seems that the grip is shaped for the size of hand of someone the size of my wife, which is all good and well, except she needs to put so much force into that grip safety that she really struggles. The other problem is it means that the trigger is quite a long way back compared to a modern pistol. So all you people who say you put the first pad of the finger on the trigger, that's all good and well, except if you do that, my finger is totally bent and I can't pull it straight back. So I've got to put a lot more finger on there. Then we get to the next problem, which is that it's heavy. It's creepy, it's heavy, it's got no strong brake, no crisp brake. Now, as you can imagine, this does not add up to something that is easy to shoot. So I went to the range with it, and I have a general principle of guns of the single-handed era. If I'm shooting them for fun, I'll shoot them single-handed, which didn't go exactly to plan. This is a really horrible pistol to shoot one-handed. It really is. And it comes from an era where pistols were considered one-handed guns. Whew! So yeah, the sum total of that is that although the pistol is quite inherently accurate, the sights are all right for a gun of the period, it's just the ergonomics conspire against you totally to prevent you from shooting it particularly accurately. The other thing is that the recoil is quite lively, as you'd imagine. Now, the cartridge here, it's basically halfway between a 380 auto and a 9mm parabellum. In fact, it's 108 grains doing 1,050 feet per second, and I measured it, and it really does do that. So compared to the early loadings of 9mm parabellum, you're only about 15 grains lighter and 30 feet per second slower. So it's really no slouch, and it lets you know about it. It's really very, very lively. So I thought, for my next test, what'll I do? Well, I had some competitions coming up, and because practice is akin to cheating, I just went and shot it in competition. Now, this competition is two-handed. We call it silhouettes, even though it's not what in America you'd understand as silhouette shooting, and it's the big Euro racetrack targets, and we shoot strings of 5 shots in 10 seconds, 8 seconds and 6 seconds, and then repeat for a total of 30 shots. And because this is such a pest, I taped it down and blocked it so that so I wouldn't have to squeeze it so hard.
Clip 4. Clip 5. We're ready to pop.
So as you can see, that went all right, but nowhere near as good as shooting a proper pistol like my SIG P210. Now, for the countries that use this, the mainest user was Sweden, and this is a Swedish one. They're Swedish model 1907 pistols. There were, in total, between FN and the Husqvarna factory in Sweden, there were over 100,000 of these produced. They were produced by FN until the outbreak of World War I. The Germans occupied Liège and the FN factory. They weren't interested in these. So they stopped making them. So Husqvarna in Sweden, which is also known for chainsaws and agricultural machinery, they started making the license. FN took it up again after the war until the late 20s for non-Swedish customers, and in the end there were a couple of other contracts in the 30s that the Swedes dealt with and produced for. And aside from Sweden, there was the Turkish Gendarmerie, Paraguay, Chile. There were a couple of there's a list of countries that I can't remember off the top of my head. Now, these went into store in the early 1940s, having been replaced by the Lahti pistol, which is another one that I will hopefully be able to bring you in another video. And then in the early 80s, the Lahti pistol started cracking, which was less than good. So the Lahti pistols went out. These came out of service, 1980s. And were reissued, and someone on my Facebook page was in the Swedish Army at the period and said they were rather unimpressed by it, and they were very, very happy when the Glock 17 came in a little later at the end of the 80s. They're very happy to get rid of these. Now, this particular one is probably mid-20s from the markings. It's from Artillery Regiment Number 1. Originally they had a beautiful deep blue on them, but they were sandblasted as part of a refurb program and then Parkerized, so they're less pretty than they were. And over here in Europe, they are as cheap as chips because no one wants them. But I have this strange love-hate relationship with it. I really like to like it. Do I? I'm not sure. I've got this real sort of Taylor Swift ambivalence thing going on with this gun. But anyway, let's bring it around and have a closer look at it. So let's first of all take a quick look at the ammunition. It comes in little boxes of 28, and this is wartime issued ammo, and it comes with a little slip of paper that asks you very politely to cherish your empty cases because supplies of brass are limited. Now, compare it with a 9mm Parabellum, which I suppose most people watching are familiar with. Overall length is a bit shorter, it's 15 grains lighter, and it's a short little dumpy bullet. But the case is a millimetre or so longer than the 9x19. Now, these you can make them by cutting down 38 Super if you want to, and I've heard of people just loading light 9mm paraloads with short bullets because it headspaces on the rim, and it's actually got a controlled feed kind of like a Lee Enfield, which is quite interesting. It's got quite a big extractor, and it will support the rimless case. Whether the firing pin will reach the primer well enough to set it off in any particular moment is another matter, but try it, report back to me. You get 7 of them in a magazine, and these I believe came with 3 magazines initially, although I've only got 1 for this one. Now there's that awful grip safety that you've got to squeezed really, really hard. It's just surprising quite how tough that spring is. And if we look at the size, to compare it with a modern full-size pistol, 226 there, put the sights at about the same point. I mean, we've got probably 3/4 of an inch shorter in the grip there. And then if we put the backs of the grips together, you see quite how much further forward the trigger on the SIG-Sauer is there. I mean, it's really short. Really surprisingly short. Now if we look on this side, we've got the manual safety, up for safe, down for fire, as usual, which is also the manual hold open that you also need for stripping. Now the automatic hold open is on the other side, and it's actuated by the magazine. We put an empty magazine in there, it'll pop up and it'll hold open, and then heel release, typical of Euro pistols. So to release after you put in a new magazine, the only real way to do it, that's too slippery, is to pull it back and let it go. Now to take it apart, it starts off not too dissimilarly to a 1911. Push in that plunger, turn the bushing, one way, he says. Like that. That comes out like that. Lock it open with that, and then we turn the barrel. You'll see why in a moment. We can then drop it, and then the whole lot comes off the top. Mainspring, barrel there, turn it again, barrel comes out, and you're done. Now it's not a fixed barrel like a PPK, even though it's blowback. So how this works is you've got a series of lugs there that engage with a series of lugs there, and that holds your barrel pretty stably. Obviously not as stable as if it was integral to the frame, but there you go. And the whole turning the barrel one way or the other thing, what that does, when you turn it up, it turns those lugs out of those recesses and into a recess in there. And then you turn it out and you can pull the barrel out. Now it's not a true hammerless, it's a hidden hammer design. There's the hammer, and it's under quite a lot of spring tension. Now the ejector is that notch there, and it's kind of Lee Enfield style in a way, because the extractor pushes the empty case against this groove here, and whereas a Lee Enfield typically ejects with friction, this does wait until it gets to the notch, and it flips it out, and it's pretty reliable. Certainly, the only little problems I've had are because some of this 70-year-old ammo is a bit wonky. So to get it back together, put the lugs down, put it in until you can turn it into the recess. Then you've got this end of the spring goes in so that the nub comes out there. Then making sure that the other end of the spring guide goes properly into its hole, we slide the rails together, make sure that that has actually gone in like that, and then we pull it back until it hooks up there. Turn the barrel back, let it down, and then we need to put the bushing in, turn it, and then push the plunger and turn this the rest of the way, like that. Simples. So thanks for watching. Please consider supporting TFB TV on Patreon if you haven't already, and particular thanks go out to our sponsors Ventura Munitions, Proxibid and Vista Outdoor, with whose help this kind of content is possible. Bye.